Now you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. Enda call here with you in the company of Alan Morrison and Juco James. As always, we have a game to get stuck into. 5-1 win away to St Mirren. St Mirren obviously down to 10 men by the full-time whistle, but it wasn't all Celtic's way at the weekend. The first half was definitely a stodge affair, if you could use that word, and the second half was much better. So we're noticing a bit of a trend here when we're coming up against teams that park the bus and potentially nick a goal. Celtic struggled to break them down initially. The cavalry came off the bench and Celtic absolutely blew them away in the second half. So there's loads to get stuck into with this game. It's going to be a busy podcast. James, Alan, you're very welcome along, and welcome to everybody who's watching on YouTube as well. If you do have any questions or thoughts on the game, do get the comments coming in and like the video as well so more people can see the live stream on YouTube. So, Alan, I guess we'll start with you. This was a game that we've seen before with Celtic this season. Poor enough first half, strong performance from the opposition, made it difficult for Celtic for large parts of the game. And then Celtic had 4 players that are capable of being starters in the team come off the bench, and the game completely changed.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, some patterns, and to credit to James, it was pointed out that St Mirren have been the template for many others. So when you say we've seen this game before, it's because teams looked at the way St Mirren set up against Celtic in September and won 2-0, and have tried to emulate in many respects. And again, we saw a very well organised. I mean, listen, in my view, this is the second best coached team in the league, right? So, in that respect, even though they haven't necessarily got the best, most salaried players, I think they're the second best organised team. I mean, they do play the same way every week, I think, pretty much. They do play the same formation. They've got a very, quite a small, tight group knit of squad of players, so the relative predictability in terms of the way they're going to play. And they do it very effectively, and they all work bloody hard for each other, which, you'd think is the minimum requirement. But, when we watch Hibs and Aberdeen and Dundee United especially, even Hearts sometimes, you wonder why they can't emulate at least that aspect of it. So in that respect, they set out, again, to make life difficult. Now, we often talk about game state. So when you get a penalty after 6 minutes and take the lead, I think that almost in their minds kind of confused them a little bit in terms of, do they continue to play the way they set out at 0-0 originally, or do they just retreat that little bit more potentially? Now, I'm not sure they did that, because I think they held Celtic at length. What they did particularly effectively was they shut down, especially Aaron Moy, every time he got the ball. And it was either Gogic or Dunn took it in turns to come out and close down Moy. And I was watching that in the first half thinking, I wonder if they're doing this across the pitch, but they didn't. They left McGregor pretty much alone, and they didn't do it to Hatate. Now, I think Hatate tended to, the only reason I could think for that was that Hatate tended to drift more wide. I suspect their centre-backs didn't want to be pulled out into the touchline, whereas Moy was trying to find spaces in the sort of central half spaces. And also, I suspect, in reality, if you allow Aaron Moy time to turn in the final third and get his head up, that's a very sort of dangerous proposition, really, because he's just so good at picking people out. So I think they did that very effectively. And then there was a compounding Celtic sort of impotence, really, was what we saw in the League Cup final, which was just the lack of the ability of the two wide players to really influence the game. Maeda just couldn't get on the ball, and when he did, he kind of fell over it and didn't really do anything with it. And Jota, when Jota got the ball, he just kind of gave it away, and he looked a yard short of pace, and didn't seem to. He seemed to be starting his dribbles and his feints and his flicks 5 yards before he'd even reached the defender, which I don't understand. Rather than take the ball to the defender, then do his trick. So I think for those reasons, the first half was very, very stodgy. But all the way through it, I was thinking, should I be panicking? Will we work this out? Because what's the evidence? The evidence is that we have done. And obviously, we can talk about the sending off and so forth, and that obviously has a massive influence. And I think it completely destroyed their mentality in terms of the game plan at that point. That and being 1-0 up, I think it actually confused them as to what they were trying to do quite a lot of the time. And maybe we can get on into that deeper as we go on.
James, this going into this game, when I saw the starting lineup, sometimes I go into the comments and to see what the general reaction to it is, and a lot of people were like, "Yes, this is our strongest starting 11. This is the best team Celtic could have put out on the pitch." And then it just didn't seem to work out that way for whatever reason. The players who came off the bench were better performing, be that because of the St Mirren tiredness in the second half or the way the Celtic approached the second half. But what do you think went wrong, particularly in the first half for Celtic, that they just couldn't get it going?
I think it's more of the same, meaning that we've had this issue to a degree, particularly when teams are better organized, when they do some smart things. So people may recall that Rangers gave us a bit of a headache late last season when they had Bassey effectively man-marking Rakic. If anyone remembers that, he would jump in kind of like Dunn or Gogic did with Moy. So, you know, I agree with Alan. I mean, and I mentioned this in prior occasions that Robinson seems to be, you know, on the upper echelon of domestic managers as far as being smart and, you know, having an organized, well-coached side. And I actually checked when Alan was speaking. They've only played that system basically this season, it looks like to me anyway. And looking at the different sources of data. So, you know, basically 5-3-2, 3-5-2. So yeah, I think there's an interesting discussion. We've had it before, whether Maeda is an ideal matchup when we talk about, you know, this kind of situation. When a team's not all that interested in build-up play and isn't going to possess the ball that much, isn't a huge threat on the counter on the ground. I mean, they're going to pass through our midfield. How much does that nullify his contribution? You know, that tracking back he does, the pressing he does, and then you're kind of left with what he does in attack. And when you're playing against a more bunkered, tighter, narrow, disciplined side like St Mirren have been against us under Robinson, and in fairness under Goodwin to a degree as well in the past, you know, he's not the best at beating a fullback 1v1. And Jota did, as you guys said, maybe didn't have his best day in that regard. You know, had a nice finish for the goal, but yeah, it was not a good day. And this is just anecdotal, but he has not looked himself even, you know, we've talked in the past that kind of flat out pace is not his strength. And he's looked even a little bit slower. Maybe it's a seasonal thing. Maybe maybe he's not responding well to the February and March Scottish weather. But yeah, he you know, he's having trouble on a quickness and a speed basis, you know, beating domestic fullbacks with consistency. And I think you know, given a guy of his skill level, that is less than ideal. So yeah, it was, you know, they've got some big, reasonably athletic guys in midfield that nullified a little bit, and our wing play, you know, just didn't compensate in order to generate the threats that we wanted.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues with that is because the new role that Kyogo has, or seems to have within the team, that he's getting on the ball a lot less, and he's actually more of a box threat than a link-up player. Because, I mean, last year, maybe it was a necessity thing that he just didn't have the players around him that he felt he needed to drop back and get on the ball a bit more. But this year, he's very much playing as an out-and-out striker who's not on the ball all that much. And I think that's reflected in the data throughout the season. But Alan, we're talking about Jota. I know you dropped off there for a second, but we're talking about Jota Maeda. Maeda was the guy who got the hook at halftime as opposed to Jota. And judging upon what most people were saying online, Jota was the worst player. Now, personally, I didn't think he was all that bad. Like, I didn't think he was horrendous. I didn't think he was at his best. But why do you think it was Jota that stayed on the pitch as opposed to Maeda?
Yeah, and this is, again, I mean, you know, this is personal to me, but maybe other people might resonate. When I was watching the game, my feeling at half-time was, just one of intense frustration with Jota and his performance, and he was just making me mad every time he got the ball. And I think, and also, he got recency bias. I think the last thing he did in the half was pass a simple 10-yard ball straight out of play. It was just like, it just seemed to sum up this whole half. And I was thinking, right, it needs to be a change here, and you take Jota off. But when you watch the game back, without the emotion, with emotion taken out of it, the difference between the two is that although Jota was having a really poor day in terms of outcome, he was at least continuing to try to do things. And that's I think, especially in the modern game, where teams want their attacking players to try and take people on, to try and get crosses into the box, to try shots, to try the unexpected, as opposed to maybe, I think back to quite pragmatic football in the 70s and 80s that I was brought up with. If you'd given the ball away and thrown as many poor crosses into the box as Jota, then you probably would have been hooked for being ineffective. But actually, what's ineffective in modern thinking is more sort of Maeda performance, where you're just not getting on the ball. You're not solving the problem of the fact that you're not getting on the ball. And when he is getting on the ball, it wasn't even threatening. Even if he did get past the first man, he either ran out of play or miscontrolled it. So it was just a completely ineffective performance on the ball, which it was in the League Cup final. He was absolutely incredible off the ball, and in terms of his work rate, as well as his closing down, his tracking back, especially his stopping Tavernier getting up the pitch. But in this game, that wasn't really an asset that was needed against such a deep defence. So really, he was there. The wingers were there to create and to solve the problem of this low block and of this really intense press on our creative number 8s, and solve that problem. And he didn't. He didn't contribute anything. Whereas Jota, he may not have had great outcomes, but he at least in that first half had a couple of shots. He at least set up a chance for McGregor. He at least tried to get the ball into the box. He at least tried to take players on, and that's why I think he was left on and Maeda came off. And then obviously when Abada came on, he did all those things. He actually gave it away pretty much the first 4 times he got at Abada. But what he did do was, again, every time he got the ball, he just committed. And eventually you only need that to work once for you, and you're back in the game. And that's the thing. And one for kids watching is actually Jota's a brilliant example for kids, especially attackers, in terms of don't get disappointed. Don't get disheartened. Keep trying. Keep trying to beat your man. Keep trying to get to the byline. Keep trying to put those penetrative passes in, because again, in a tight game like this, you only need for it to work once. And Jota was on the back post on the wrong side to get that ball in the net to get the equaliser. And that's a classic example. When I played as a striker. Some of the worst games of football I ever played in my life, you walked off the pitch with a hat-trick, because that's just the way football is sometimes. You're having a stinker, and then the ball falls to you in front of goal, and you tap it in, and suddenly the whole world looks different. And that's exactly what happened to him. The whole world looked rosy once that ball trundled over the line. So, yeah, great example. But I think that was really what it was. He was at least getting in the game. He was getting on the ball. And although it was a bit painful to watch, he was at least trying to make things happen. And the manager gambled that eventually something would go right for him, which it did.
Yeah, and this is why I think the idea around data analysis is very interesting, because the analysis side of things is the most critical part of data collection and analyzing football using data. Is that, take Jota, for example, at the weekend, you could look at his game and say, okay, yeah, he failed in 10 dribbles, give the ball away, 11 times. But you could look at that and say, okay, yeah, he had a terrible game. But then the flip side is the point that you're making, is that no, he was actually trying loads of different things, trying it all the time. Even when they weren't coming off, he was still attempting it. And that's why I think a lot of clubs, modern clubs especially, get bogged down on efficiency with players, that sometimes they'll take a less talented player because he's more efficient and more consistent and does the simple things. Whereas I think the likes of Jota, I've always said it, he's a player that Celtic should always have at their disposal. Somebody who is able to make something happen out of nothing. And I mean, it only takes one attempt to do that. Sometimes you will fail 5 times to get past that player, but then the 6th time you try it, you get past him, you score a goal. And ultimately, Jota was left on the pitch and he got a goal. And maybe that's confirmation bias that he didn't have that bad of a game. But I'd be on your side of the argument, Alan, that I prefer my players to try things regardless of how bad they're playing. And Jota's one of those players.
So, and sorry, I'll just jump into quickly. So, just again, context as always is that he actually did end up with. So, I have this kind of aggregated attacking threat score, which is kind of my own thing. So, Abada had the highest. Jota was second. He broke 100 for his packing score as well, and his expected scoring contribution was, I think, the 3rd highest. So, it wasn't all bad. But the point is well with Jota, and this is the same point we've made about Alfredo Morelos quite a few times, is that Jota's absolutely fine for a team like Celtic, who, you know, he batters his cross against the full-back or blasts it over the bar. He's going to get the ball again in 5 minutes, 2 minutes, and he's going to have another go, right? But if you're Southampton and you're battling relegation and you've got someone like Jota, and he gets the ball 5 times in the half, and every time, you know, it breaks down, that's not so good. So, you know, he's the sort of player that he's probably going to be most effective in a dominant team, I think.
A luxury player is what they used to call him. Am I right?
Well, it's not luxury for Celtic because you need that. You need someone who's like him, who's not going to get despondent because things aren't coming off against a packed defence.
Yeah, one of the things that Jose Mourinho used to say is that he needs 8 piano carriers, but only 3 piano players. And for me, Jota is a piano player as opposed to a piano carrier. So we mentioned Abada there. James, he also came off the bench and was incredibly effective. I mean, this kid is he's just so exciting, and we haven't really got to see all that much of him this year. And I'm interested to get your take on that and why that might be, that he just hasn't really made an impact consistently in the starting lineup, given what he has actually done when he's been in the team.
Yeah, that's a difficult question. I mean, obviously, the manager has preferred Jota and Maeda. I think in certain circumstances that's a very defendable logic and preference. I think it becomes tougher when you're facing some of these bunkered sides and you are looking at, as we mentioned and discussed when Alan had dropped off, that some of Maeda's effectiveness and value might be muted or blunted a little bit when teams are just going long and not really looking to counter against us by passing through us. So, yeah, I think it's this is a good problem to have. I mean, Abada is basically making it difficult not to play him, right? So that's what you want. You want someone that, when they do get the opportunity, is making a case for themselves and almost forcing their way into the side. I think it'll be interesting to see how much playing time he gets, if he does get more starts, and which of the two between Jota and Maeda would be dropped as a result. I suspect it would be Maeda, but that would probably be my preference, again, against at least 10 sides in the league. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about Abada over and over. I mean, he's just this fascinatingly quixotic player that just has an ability to create almost like a force of nature in attacking, warts and all. That's the fascinating part. And there are substantial warts that are eyesores when they pop out, but when you net it all out, he's just been a terrific player.
Yeah, Alan, there's a couple of facets to the Abada conversation. So firstly, you could definitely make the argument that this is a young guy who is being nurtured in a sort of consistent and mature way, that they're not throwing them in every single game, not putting too much pressure on his shoulders. Last year, I think it was different, where it was definitely a necessity for him to be a starter consistently, whereas this year it's not really. So he's sort of just being, edged into the team, and he's definitely still having an impact that way. Second way you can look at it is that potentially Abada is more dangerous coming off the bench because of what he brings and how attacking and direct he is the fitness that he brings against a tiring side. And then thirdly, it's just the form of the other players, that Maeda has been so good since the World Cup that it has just been difficult for Abada to get into the team. So where do you fall on him?
Yeah, no, I think a lot of good points there, and I don't disagree with many of them, to be honest with you. I think with Maeda, yes, his form was brilliant after the World Cup, but it's certainly dropped off on the ball, certainly in the last 2 games. So maybe Abada, especially after that performance, has earned a chance. But it's an interesting one in terms of what dynamics are you looking for, because there are very different players. Jota's a player who will get on the ball anywhere on the pitch and take the ball and look for the ball and look for work anywhere on the pitch. And, you know, as his goal and assist record shows, he's equally as capable of scoring or assisting. You know, with Maeda, you're just not going to get that. You're not going to get that quantity of chances created, or, you know, whilst he's dangerous certainly in the box, and as he showed in Japan, he's got a very good goal record. He's not going to give you that all-round attacking threat, but of course what he gives you is this tremendous off-the-ball ability to harass and bother defenders and not give them a moment's peace and force mistakes and stretch the game. He will stretch teams in ways that maybe Abada and even Jota, as James said, he's not got blistering pace, doesn't. So you could end up with a situation where you've got Jota and Abada, and you're just not pulling the teams, just not pulling the opposition out of position. And when it's a low block, you're just not getting the spaces created, and the runs are just not being made dynamically enough, because both want to come a little bit short, get the ball, and then drive at the opposition, which can sometimes be a bit easier to defend. But I keep coming back to now, and it's been like 2 seasons with Abada, and I agree with James. There's a lot of rubbish in there. There's a lot of crap that he gives out. Terrible decisions, bad passes. Really, really poor stuff. But his expected scoring contribution, so that's expected goals plus expected assists, and he's got the equivalent of just over 18 matches of data here, is 1.2. 1.2 goals or assists every game, and he's managing to get one. He's got one. So to put that into context, I think Jota's 0.8 and Maeda's 0.7. So just from sheer attacking output, Abada makes a very strong case to be included. And for me, a home game, even though it's against Hearts, who should be one of the stronger teams, but a home game, would be where I would be looking to utilise him. I think he deserves to be given his head and just see how effective he can be, especially after, as I say, that performance. I mean, I was a bit taken aback when he got the man of the match on the. I was watching UK Sky, and he was given the man of the match, but actually, he did have the best attacking stats in the game for 45 minutes. I mean, in that second half, he got into the box 8 times, which is a huge number. I mean, if you just bear with me, the next highest number in terms of possessions in the box would actually be Jota with 6. So 8 in 45 minutes, and he ran with the ball. One of the things that Celtic did in the second half that they didn't do in the first half is they actually ran and drove at them. In the first half, they only did 7 what I'd call progressive runs, and in the second half, Abada had like 8 on his own, and there was 22 overall as a team. So, we changed our approach. They tired, we drove at them, but Abada was setting the example, if you like, on that one. So I don't think we've got a starting 11 in this respect. I think it's horses for courses, and obviously the 3 of them, and Haksabanovic, the 4 of them, really give you all very different options. So as James says, I'm not stressed about it. They all give something a bit different, and it's a nice problem to have, which is classic fence sitting, I'm afraid. But I would definitely give Abada the next game. I think he absolutely earns it.
Yeah. Well, this is sort of the interesting point about this game, because I think most people going into it, I was very heavy on Celtic going into this, and in a way I was proven right given they won 5-1, but I think most people were apprehensive about, how small St Mirren's pitch was, how tight they make games, and I suppose the penalty decision in the first half completely sort of super drived that opinion that St Mirren were going to make this as difficult as possible when they went 1-0 up. St Mirren actually hadn't lost the game from a winning position as well, to add even more fire to that. And Celtic were struggling. But then if you look at the second half where Celtic take on Liel Abada, Haksabanovic, Matt O'Reilly, and Tomoki Iwata. I mean, James, like this is where Celtic are going to win out a lot of these games that are tied at halftime. I know, Alan, you've been posting the stats at halftime during the games, and then again at full time, and a large amount of the time, James, it's Celtic who have 65% possession, an XG of 1.0, and then the score could be 0-0 or 1-0 Celtic, and it all looks very tight and scary and nervous given the position that Celtic are in. But in reality, it's actually a second half for Celtic could be 10 times better because of the players who are coming off. It's just the advantage that we have from that 5 substitution rule, especially.
Yeah, it's almost unfair in some respects. I mean, it's taken a league dynamic that's already been challenged for the other teams and just made that more difficult, particularly under Ange. Obviously, we talked about this early in the season about how Hibs's performance data had been skewed because of how much time they had spent playing against 10 men, and that they had kind of racked up a lot of their XG advantage that people were referencing as far as, hey, they're underperforming their XG, or maybe they're better than they look, and that kind of thing. And it, when you really dug into it, it had a lot to do. So again, you can't underestimate or discount. I mean, I think it was around the 40th minute he got sent off. So that is a huge impact. Not only is it going down to 10 men, but for a material amount of the game. And then pile on top of that we have this deep reservoir of talent, and not only just talent, but attacking talent, which in the form of Abada and Haksabanovic, you could argue are at least as good, if not better, from a chance creation against a low block with more space, fewer men. I mean, it's pretty unfair in many respects. So yeah, it was a matter of how long until we kind of made the dam break. I think once they went down a man, the likelihood of us scoring several goals, I think, was pretty high once that happened. But yeah, I mean, all of them played reasonably well. Obviously, St Mirren fatigued, understandably, given the circumstances, and that compounds the issues for them. Just back to Abada real quick, because again, I wanted to reference this. This is before my cherished OBV became in existence. One of the ways, I had come up with my own kind of proxies to try and back into the same kind of methodology, which is, looking at players and how they benchmark on a relationship basis, meaning that for example, with Abada, if you look at his, the number of open play passes he has relative to the chances that he creates, relative to things like deep completions and the XA per shot assist that he had, right? So he had a lot of these things that suggested that his when he was on the ball, even though he had bad things that happened on a not small amount of the time, that when it came off in a way that was inordinately productive, meaning that the positives outweigh the negatives kind of thing. And that's what we've talked about with this OBV metric. And that's one of the things that we, in the discussion about Hatate, that it had been that the dial hadn't really shifted, right? So that Abada is an extreme version of that, because he's so productive when it comes off, and so ugly when it doesn't. And that's it's consistent with him. That's why he's such a fascinating player, is because whether it's dribbling and carrying the ball, taking on defenders, I mean, sometimes it just looks like an absolute train wreck. But when you step back and look at it all and kind of bundle it all up, it really is fascinating. And it'll be again, someone in his situation, I think it's going to be very interesting to monitor. Somebody had commented, and there's a little bit of a discussion in the comment section live about him changing agents, and there's been some discussion about what that might mean. He hasn't been playing that much. If I'm a guy in his situation that's performed as well as I have, and I'm an ambitious young footballer that's worried about my career, that certainly could enter into the equation. And again, that's an issue that you have when you have a lot of good players. Eventually, people that aren't playing as much as they want are not going to be happy about it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because we've talked about this over and over again, that this summer there's probably going to be some people that leave, and maybe some that'll kind of hurt, like Juranovic did, and for some like Giakoumakis did. So I think he might be another one that you kind of line up and say, okay, well, what's his career path and how much is Celtic going to be a part of it?
I'm pretty sure Giakoumakis hasn't even trained yet because of his visa.
He's he was on the bench. I don't know if he got in. He got it. He was on the bench this past weekend. I know.
Okay, so I think it must have been sorted out then. As recent as last week, I think he was still struggling with his visa. So I mean, that's a shit show. You think you'd sort that out before you go. But yeah, Alan, I guess I hate referring to these players as assets because they're humans. But in terms of monetary value, like Abada is a young international who has Champions League experience with 3 years left in his contract and has played at a high level senior football already. He is one of Celtic's strongest assets, really. If you're going to sell him this summer, might be the best option.
Well, I mean, he's still a very young player, and he's appeared in, I'm just checking now, 37 matches this season, which I think
that seems like more than I imagined. I don't know.
Well, that's the most in the squad. And I think it was the same last season. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's appeared in more games than any other player under Postecoglou. So as a 37-year-old, as a young 21-year-old, 20 or whatever he is.
Was that a Freudian slip that you were wishing you were 37 again, Al?
Well, yes, commenting on you, James, obviously. He's getting a decent amount of football, right? I said he's 37 appearances equates to just over 18, 90 minutes, if you like. So he's getting like half a game, I suppose. But, again, this is why I think someone like Giakoumakis shot himself in the foot, in my view, because here's a player who, what's the biggest club he's going to play for? Where's he going to win medals and get success? Yes, okay, he's coming on playing 30 minutes, but he's coming on playing 30 minutes. He's getting 3 or 4 shots at goal, probably scoring at least one every other game, ending up with great stats and a bunch of medals. And, that might not be for everybody, right? And Abada has got to think about, Abada's stats are ridiculous, as James has said. And there's no doubt that if you can find somebody who looks a bit further than the top 5 leagues, which is very rare today, it's very rare to go onto Twitter and see a list of players with stats, and it's actually not the top 5 leagues. But given that there are some smart people out there that look beyond the top 5 leagues, I would suggest he would be in the top 5 of any list of attacking players in terms of sheer volume of expected goals, expected assists, etc. In Europe, right? So he's bound to be on people's radars in that respect. I mean, as James said, you don't want any of those players to go, and I wouldn't want him to go if I was thinking about player trading. There'd be a couple of names that spring to my mind before him in terms of whose stars are reasonably high that I think would be relatively easy to replace in the squad. I think he would be very difficult to replace in the squad, actually. In fact, frankly, it'd cost a fortune to replace as a 21-year-old with this kind of stat. So, I would like to see him get a run of games, I'll be honest, and to really show those numbers from a starting position. Because again, come back to Giakoumakis. If you compare Giakoumakis as a starter versus Giakoumakis as a sub, very, very different stats. Whereas, if you looked at Giakoumakis' numbers overall, they were about the same, if not slightly better than Kyogo's. If you looked at him as a starter, there was just no comparison. Kyogo was way, way more effective as a starter, and Giakoumakis was more effective as a sub. Remember, Kyogo never comes on after 60 minutes against a tired defence, does he? Ever. So, sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but I'm still kind of a bit down on Giakoumakis' attitude, but yeah, no, Abada would be one I'd be wanting to hopefully that we keep and nurture, because I think he's, as James says, with a lot of rough edges, he's also got a lot of exceptional abilities.
Yeah, and I'm not advocating for him to be sold. I'm just throwing it out as a potential that, you know, I would not be surprised if he was sold in the summer.
Are you saying Abada's not good enough? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly
Abada's
what I'm saying. I'll clip that. I'll clip that, and I'll stick it out on Twitter, see how people react to that.
You'll clip it so it looks like I'm making a statement.
Make sure you get your comments at the ready. Everyone get ready for the pylon. Now, I guess another player came off the bench in this game was Haksabanovic. I'm always interested in Haksabanovic because, like, he came into such fanfare and he did seem like a really exciting player, and he still does. I'm not saying he has been a letdown in any way, but there's just something about him. It just doesn't seem to have settled in the way that you might have wanted him to. That's a very broad statement. I don't know how I can back that up in any way with sort of specifics, but there's just something about Haksabanovic that it seems like he should be a starter, and if he played to his best and was consistent without injury, that he would be a starter, James. But I'm not sure what your take on him is, because I think we're all waiting for him to score a goal, and then the goal came and we thought that was going to be it, and it would be sort of a waterfall of goals from him. But you're on mute, or no, you're not.
So as someone who is can't jump over a telephone book and is as slow as molasses in wintertime, I think he's too slow.
To be a winger? Stop, or to be a winger?
I think he does not appear to have those top two gears, and a lot of the time that's okay. Like he's so good on the ball, and we've talked about how creative he is, and he seems to be a pretty intelligent player as far as decision making, that kind of thing. But I wonder if that might be factoring into it. I mean, if you're going to see a guy in training every day and he just doesn't have those top two gears. And I have to say, when I looked at him, when news came out that we were signing him, and again, this is not a stat. I don't have any tracking data to back this up, but it was visible to me, and looking at his video clips, that he, is not swift relative to, again, he'd be almost like a winger version of Aaron Moy, right? Which on the balance of things, like, wing is not where you need that, right? I mean, it's going to glare even more so out wide than it is in the midfield. So I'm postulating, right? So maybe that could be it, because again, he's going up against guys like Maeda, like Abada, who do have those, at least the top, next to top gear, and at times even that highest gear. And if you're going to change things up, like if you're going to have a guy who doesn't have that top gear, you kind of already have Jota in that category. So is he better than Jota? Overall, I think that's a good, interesting conversation. But I think that you don't. You have Abada and Maeda that's going to give you that kind of athleticism and the speed, and that remains my concern with him.
Yeah, we have seen him play centrally as well. Whether that's a better position for him or not, I thought he was actually quite good when he played centrally. Alan, is this just a case of, again, similar to Abada, that there's just so many good players in the squad that it is difficult to cement down a place consistently? Because even the likes of Iwata, for the short amount that I've seen with Iwata, he's a very good player, but he's not going to see many more than 20 minutes per game as the way the Celtic are playing.
So I've not looked at Haksabanovic for a while, probably because he's been a bit sort of in and out and not had that many minutes. But he's just got over 10 matches worth of data, so we ought to do something on him. As James was speaking, I was just flicking through the data. He looks like he's basically not a winger, right? He's just not a winger. I don't think he's a winger. He's not fast enough, as rightly said, and his dribbling ability is good in terms of his trickery. But if you look at his profile, his data profile is completely different to the other three, Jota, Abada, Maeda. Where he stands out, where he's head and shoulders above all of those three, is in his creative passing. Yeah. So he creates three times.
So is it 10?
I think he's a 10. Honestly, I think he's a 10. He's not much of a goal threat, but in terms of creative passing, he's head and shoulders above the other three. He creates 3 times as many chances per 90 minutes as Maeda does. He creates more chances per 90 minutes than Jota does. And we often talk about Jota's creativity in that sense. He has nearly double the number of pack passes of the other three, and that's generally from a wide position. So to me, he's somebody you probably want to have central. If you want somebody to thread little clever balls through to the likes of Kyogo and the likes of Abada and Jota inverting and coming inside, he would be the one to do it. But the problem you've got then, of course, is you couldn't have him and Moy. I mean, even St Mirren would run all over you in midfield with those two in there.
Throw in Turnbull there as well.
Yeah, but Turnbull is a 3. I mean, this is the trade-off that clubs like Celtic have to make. Haksabanovic is clearly a very talented footballer. Clearly got immense technical skills. He's got great vision. His creativity is excellent. But he doesn't have that top-end speed. So the likes of West Ham, where he was at, would just go, well, you're not quick enough, and that's the end of it. That's the end of the conversation. Whereas, for Celtic, you can say, right, well, we can live with this, because if you can wiggle your way through a packed defence and thread a little ball through, the fact that you're not sprinting onto things, that's fine. That's the trade-off that we're happy to take, sort of thing. But the thing you have to be careful of is the toxic combinations we talk about, which is you can't have him and Moy and Turnbull and on you go, sort of thing. Otherwise, that's just not going to work as a balanced team. So, and also we don't play with a 10. So that's the other interesting thing. We don't really play with an out 10. Yeah. So it's interesting for him because, as I say, just based on 10 games of data, and as I say, that's passes my threshold for what I believe is a sufficient amount of data to form, sensible conclusions or reasonable first conclusions. He profiles again completely differently. So look at it 2 ways. One, on the basis that as a squad, we've got yet another player who offers something completely different to the other players that normally play in his position. But there's buts, and I suspect the buts don't really matter until you try and win games in Europe, which we keep coming back to, right? Mm-hmm. Because to win in Europe, you need a player like Jota with speed, or Haksabanovic with speed. They're the players that would move the dial in Europe.
Yeah, I'd love to see the American NFL style combines that they have, but with football clubs. So Celtic would do a combine at the start of the year. Who can run fastest? Who can jump highest? Who's the strongest? So that everyone could understand what type of player and who they are that we have within our squad is. And I don't know if that would make things worse or better for those players overall in terms of the abuse they get. But I'd love to see. I just love to see.
We all know the answer to that.
Yeah, I'd love to see a 100-meter sprint more than anything of every Celtic player to see who's the quickest, because I think the winner of that would surprise people. So before we move on to the Hearts game, just want to say massive congratulations to everyone's favorite Celtic player, and that's Alistair Johnston getting his first goal for the club, even though pretty sure that just was not his goal. If you weren't being kind, that's probably not his goal, but he's claiming it, we'll claim it, and I think everyone was happy to see him getting that goal, because he's just he's everyone's favorite player at the club right now. Hearts this weekend, a comment came in. I'm not going to do the full question because I think it would take up too much time and it's too broad of a question, but I'll change it to a more specific game style question. So that it comes in from Timothy Leary on Twitter. He's saying that Hearts are closer to the relegation spots than to first place. So I think that goes to show, and I know Hearts have been pretty decent this year, that goes to show the relative gap in first and second this year. I feel like it's more pronounced than in the last number of years than it has been, especially within Celtic. I mean, Celtic are on course to be to break the record of most goals scored in the league. As far as I know, they're not too far off, so they probably will do that by the end of the season if they continue in the the way that they are. So what are we thinking for this weekend in terms of this Hearts game? Is it something that we worry about, or is it again like St Mirren where we think halftime might be a worry, second half blow them away again?
I'm actually less concerned about Hearts at home than I am away to St Mirren. So, you know, we've talked a little bit this season about what kind of a debacle Hibs and Aberdeen have been. Have you looked at the table, Enda? Do you see where Hibs and Aberdeen are in the table right now?
Mm-hmm.
They're right behind Hearts. Okay, as big of a debacle as they've both been, and they're still where they are. Hearts are conceding the highest amount of non-penalty XG in the league. Okay, that they are about, let's see, 50% more than St Mirren they've been conceding. So they definitely have some attacking threat. But the balance, I mean, they actually have a pretty poor non-penalty XG difference. They're 1, 2, 3, 4. They're fifth in the league in that regard. So I think from we talk about styles make fights, right? It's a whole different kettle of fish when you go to Hearts, but at home against them, they tend not to play the bunkering. They don't come in and they try to play a little bit, and that usually is a really good matchup for us. Within, again, the one caveat is always, do they have a keeper that has an ability to stand on his head? Clark has been a decent keeper the last couple of seasons, and certainly as a number 2 in Scotland, not so bad. They could do a lot worse. So, but I would expect a relatively comfortable game. Now it might be a 5-2 game, something like that. Like it wouldn't surprise me if some of their athleticism and skill and attack gives us some problems. I expect an entertaining game. But unless we have a horrific day finishing or some mix of Clark having a worldy type of game, we should get a ton of chances. And, unless it's one of those horrible variance games, I would think we would win by at least 2 goals.
Yeah. So I keep saying this weekend, we are playing Hearts this weekend, but that's in the cup.
That's in the cup. Yeah.
Yeah. Tomorrow night is a game against them. So that's at home tomorrow night, and then away on Saturday or Sunday in the Scottish Cup. So Saturday 12 o'clock. So it's quite a tight turnaround for Celtic when it comes to playing this team. But again, Hearts have to do the exact same thing. So I would suggest, Alan, that Celtic make a couple of changes tomorrow. Maybe Abada does come into the starting lineup, but overall, Ange hasn't changed 8 or 9 different positions in a row all that often. So what are we expecting tomorrow versus Saturday?
Yeah, as James said, I agree 100%. I'm much more worried about that game on Sunday than I am about this one. For 2 seasons in a row now, Hearts goalkeeper has had to make more saves in a game than any other team in the league. Even Dundee United this season, Hearts keeper has to make more saves. That's 2 seasons in a row that's been the case. So last season they had Craig Gordon. They don't have him now. So I think that's a big loss for them. Alexander Clark's decent, of course, as James said. So this isn't a great side. In fact, the fact they haven't improved that tells you a lot about Robbie Nielsen, in my view, in terms of he's just not addressed that defensive frailty really, in terms of their ability to give up shots. And of course, they're hugely reliant on I think the second in Scotland, which means second in the world in terms of number of penalties they get. It's just a phenomenal number of penalties that Hearts get in games. I don't know the exact number, but it's a lot. Been a lot this season. 7, 8, 9, if more, sort of thing. So I don't.
I think
he went into the Matrix.
Yeah. The powers that be heard him talking about penalties and cut him off before he could reveal any of their dark secrets.
Pulled the plug on him. It's Hearts are fascinating. Obviously they've had some positive variants, as I like to say, with tongue in cheek with some of the penalties and that kind of thing. But again, they do have some attacking talent, and I think that you have to give them that. But yeah, their midfield's not all that, commanding, shall we say. So I don't think they'll give us too much trouble in that sense, where, I'm typically more concerned. So yeah, and I think where Alan was going is, I mean, they just make a lot of mistakes. Like they're the antithesis of a Robinson coached St Mirren. They don't have that kind of discipline and shape and organization typically, as giving up the most shots 2 seasons in a row would given their wage bill and standing in the table would imply. So yeah, I look forward to this kind of game, because again, it should be more of a back and forth, open, exciting matchup. That if they scored first, or like, this is the kind of game where it wouldn't be the most shocking thing on earth if they even went up 2-0, right? Like if we have a bad day and make a mistake, and like they have enough attacking talent that they could punish us if, just from a early screw up kind of situation, it just happened to occur, we get a bad bounce, to get a handball in the box, miraculously, the penalty for Hearts, that kind of thing. Like that wouldn't shock. But I even if we went down 2-0, I would not at all be, surprised that if we came roaring back and won 3-4, 5-2, kind of, because they're so bad defensively.
Yeah, Alan, the people in charge of Scottish football cut you off while you were chatting about penalties, and I think he might be gone again now that I start to bring it up. So I think that's where we'll wrap up the show, because I think Alan's internet is just playing up a little bit. James, thank you very much for your contribution as always, and thanks to everyone who is getting involved in the comments as well. Keep them coming after the video is over. Keep the conversation going, and like the video as well. It helps loads of people see it. We're just shy of 6,000 subscribers as well. So if you're not subscribed to the channel, hit the subscribe button as well. It means a lot to us here in the Huddle Breakdown. We will chat to you next week when we have 2 games against Hearts.
2 Hearts games to review.
2 Hearts games. Hopefully they'll be a little bit different, so that we'll be able to differentiate between the 2. But who knows? Who knows?
That's a bet you might. That's a hand you might even bet pre-flop, Enda. 2 Hearts.
Yeah, I don't.
Are you a poker player? You're not a poker player. Okay.
See, I'm a Texas Hold'em player as opposed to a poker player, so I don't know.
Well, Texas Hold'em, you could bet. You have a flush draw maybe.
Potentially.
Come on, you're a degenerate gambler. Come on.
Well, you wouldn't guess it with the setup that I am. So, right. That's where we'll wrap up the show. James, thanks. And we will chat to you next week. Good luck.